Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here for another Product Growth Leaders Conversations. Steve, we talk a lot. I mean, a lot of our clients are software companies. I'd say that 99% of the talk on product management in the social media seems to be software companies, and maybe even more B2C software companies than B2B, where we tend to have our background. But the reality is, I mean, if we go back to the origin story of product management, coming from brand management at J&J, product management is living and happening everywhere. I believe every company, regardless of industry, should have somebody doing product management. Maybe not the title product management, but doing the thing. As you think, if you look back over your years and decades and centuries of experience in product management, I, you know, there's so much to learn from people who are doing product management not in software, isn't there?
Well, of course. I make the point in one of my classes that products solve problems for personas. It doesn't say products are software. Um, your customers don't really care if it's software or hardware or services if you're solving their problem. And I worked with a team not too long ago. They asked me if they could apply Quartz, that process diagram that we use for product management, to professional services. And I went, well, yeah, here's a thought. Before you sell it, why don't you define what it is and know how big it is so that you know how much to charge for it and make sure that you're solving a problem for people. And in a different context, I was working with a team and there was a person from HR there, which always disturbs me. I mean, when HR comes into one of my training rooms, I'm like, what have I done? Who have I insulted? Anyway, I went over and I said, what's going on here? And have I offended somebody? And she's like, no, I heard the class is really good. And I was just wondering if we could apply these concepts to the programs we run in HR. And I said, of course you can. You need to define what it is and commit the resources and ultimately, deliver it to your customers. And whether it's services, whether it's programs, whatever, it's like product management is everywhere.
Product management is everywhere. I like that as a line that we should be using. So what we put together today, we got together a group of people who were doing product management in your not traditional sense. And May actually originally wanted to call this non-traditional product management. And I didn't want to lead with this thought that software product management was traditional product management. I wanted to open it up to everybody. But we've got people who've got product management in local government, product management in federal government and defense, people who have been doing it in manufacturing, in embedded devices and IoT. I've done it for services. I've done it for peer networks, right? So we wanted to have a great conversation about product management beyond software. So great panel. Adriana Tan, Dutch Dravies, Jason Weber joining May, Wang, Steve, and myself. And we're going to talk about product management beyond software. And the first question I want to ask is, what's the most common misperception of product management beyond software? What's the problem? What people don't see? What's the, again, most common misperception? May, I want to start with you on that.
I think a lot of the time it's when you go and look for what is product management and how do I do product management, it's all very focused on the now. Where are you now? And it's usually when you're really early on in your career where you're just figuring out what is a spec? How do I work with my engineers? What is a product owner? How do I work with Scrum? How do I work with my designer? And it's very low level, and you're very much thinking about that that like day to day of how do you do the specific tasks that are associated with output, with delivery, and all of the things that like we actually need to do that bring value is all the things that inform those tasks. But when you're focused on what is the actual task, it's really hard to I guess separate the two ideas so that you can think about, what is the outcome of this task? what is the outcome of the work that my team does as a whole, and what is the outcome of like what if we don't do this thing, right? Like when we talk a lot, like we as a group talk a lot about strategy and whatnot, but the content that we talk about is often catered to the the larger masses, the more people who need to hear, like not who need to hear, but who want to know. Like the questions they're asking is, how do I do product management? And oftentimes it's very focused on that instead of the much bigger picture. But also, like that's not a part of your job when you're early on. Like, how
Yep.
often do people come back and look for more context and look for more content on like how do you get to the next step? Except maybe when work pays for a course or something, like so I think that's the disconnect here.
It's interesting. I've written before about product management with a capital P and capital M, and product management with the lowercase p and a lowercase m. And I feel like this conversation is as much about the lowercase p and m. It's about, how do we understand who has the problem? What's the problem? Why do we want to solve it? Regardless of the how do we do it.
And I think that that's a really important point. And I want to add on that when we talk about our products, half the time what we think is our product isn't the actual product, right? Like, are you an internal product? Well, your product is not the actual product, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's really
What?
important to start like exploring what that looks like in that context.
Yeah, and it's interesting because to co-opt Peter Drucker, right, the only person who can tell you what your business is or what your product is the customer themselves. And I think if we understand that, it puts us in a place to do it. Adriana, you've done product management in government, and obviously there may be some software development that comes with it, but you're not at a software development company. What do you think is the biggest misconception that happens with people, especially you're in San Francisco, Silicon Valley area, you know, you're surrounded by these software product people who think very highly of themselves.
Yes. So I've done product management in software and startups and all kinds of or manners of technology companies. And I have to say, the practice is the same no matter where you are. It's about having fewer resources than you would like and still having to solve some really challenging problems anyway. And sometimes getting the space of what am I trying to do? What problems am I solving? And for whom am I solving these problems? And so then when it becomes a matter of management and government, my ex-boss always liked to say, um, you are the only provider of the service. If you don't get them to convert, like where are they going to go? So you have to get it right. So that
Yeah.
is really challenging, but also an interesting problem set. But also, I think, in government, there's a question of what does a product manager do? What does a project manager do? And what does a program manager do? Because in government, they're all three things. And so I have some thoughts on this. We can deep dive a little bit into it later. But at least in San Francisco and in other cities or government teams that do have in-house software engineers and designers and people with whom we can form like a traditional like designer, product manager, developer group of people. Um, Many of the practices and the outputs are very similar. Um, but there is also a question of what do you do when you're a junior product manager, which May has talked about. It's a lot of like jobs to be done versus being in product leadership, which has a lot more, I think, to do with, well, what should we not do? So I'll leave with
Yeah.
that.
No, I love that. And I'm going to keep it on the government bandwagon and switch over to our product philosopher, Dutch. Let's talk. What are the misconceptions?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unravel there, but yeah, so I've been working technology in Air Force and federal government for at least as long as Steve started out as the godfather of product management. And so, but I've worked hands-on as the developer in pretty much every role in the entire stack, but my heart and soul is tied to product. And the misconception with most folks that haven't done the job especially is that the product manager isn't just coming up with the concept of the solution and knowing what the problem is that needs to be solved, but that they need to actually be involved in the babysitting of the people not micromanaging, but babysitting the developers, the ones that are creating the solution. And it's the misconception is the fact that that the organization, I don't want to say business, the organization typically wants the product manager to be both strategic and tactical. They want them to have their head in the clouds and their hands on the pulse of building the product instead of focusing on the problem to solve and what the solution needs to end up looking like, and not really caring about how that gets developed. Famous quote by Henry Ford, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. It's a matter of like knowing what you solve and not really knowing what research or leadership for that matter are asking.
Dutch, you're breaking up. Do you mind? I don't know if it's your microphone.
I can go to the headset, yeah.
Okay, better.
So, a lot of similarities, but I think Adriana talked about earlier, probably less resources than somebody might have in a high-tech software company. And, probably more cat herding, it almost sounds like, than it could have been. I do want to get to that question of program and project and product in a second, but I want to give Jason and Steve a chance on this first one. Jason, you've done product management in hardware, in integrated devices and that type of stuff. As you look at this, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions?
Well, it's interesting. I've written a couple of posts on LinkedIn recently about Agile and mixing Agile with stage gate and things like that. And there's some people that comment pretty strongly, and this is my experience. The understanding of what it takes to run a software project, they just fundamentally think it's the Wild West. That anything goes, and in all reality, there probably are companies where that is the actual case. But if you do it right, the principles and everybody has said this, the fundamental things that you're doing is you're solving a problem for a customer that they're willing to pay for. I mean, I had a friend who was a product manager, and he always said, if you've got a problem and money, I can make both go away. And so it's the same thing across all of these fields. And but you do really get a lot of, it's software. It doesn't matter if it's good enough. You just fix it on the next sprint. And in the hardware side of things, they're like, yeah, if you get the drawings wrong and you and do that, it can cost you $1 million. But I think there's some big things that have made big differences in iterating. And I think a lot of that's very important in both software and hardware is the iteration. Additive manufacturing has changed the game on the hardware side. You can go in there and you can throw together really, really quickly. I mean, just on the other side of my monitor, I've got a 3D printer. I could do this if I had the skill to do that in the mechanical drawings. You can iterate, you can learn, you can change, and you can get those, your odds of getting those, molds that you have to create for a plastic injection or whatever, right? The first time, your odds go up so dramatically by just doing the types of things that product managers should do. And hopefully over time, I come from the industrial and manufacturing world, and we always joke that IT and OT, so IT is information technology, OT is operations technology, they're like at the middle school dance where you've got all the girls on one side of the room and all the boys on the other side of the room. I've been in meetings where that's how they sit at the table. The operations, the manufacturing people are on one side, the IT people are on the other side. And my previous boss made people like mix it up one time when we were there. It was actually pretty funny. But there's a lot of this between the hardware and software that kind of, there's just misunderstanding about how these projects work and how the process is. And I think fundamentally they're the same. The timelines may be different, but the whole learning, iterating, making better is something you absolutely can take across the aisle, so to speak. And the fun thing is my most personally successful product I've ever done was a services thing that had some software behind it. And that was actually a dream because although we had to educate the services people, they were just as agile because they're just people doing different jobs. And so
Yeah.
that actually had the most parallel to a software project in a lot of ways. So
it's interesting because you think about the lead time, the lead time for a hardware because of getting the drawings right and making sure every integrated components work together. tends to make it longer. It may be more analogous to like enterprise software, which is big, where you don't have, it's hard to, where roadmaps are 2 or 3 years out because it's big stuff that people have to plan for changing with their business versus, some of the more startup-y software companies where agile can be happening. I think on the services side, it's almost the opposite. When I've done product management for services, one of the nice things is you don't need to code anything, right? You identify the problem. It's almost a product marketing exercise to understand the problem and the value prop. And then, maybe creating some repeatable methodologies and eventually maybe getting some automation. But I feel like depending on the form factor of what you're product managing, there's so many differences. And it may be in my head, I'm going, oh, wait, there's probably so much variance in software based on enterprise software running banks is going to be more like hardware because we're having to plan 2-3 years out where, a true agile place, which is experimenting and on the fly and changing stuff, is more like services because it's more quick to market. I don't know. So many things in my head right now. I say that every week. I know. Steve, what do you think? You've taught people from all. I mean, you've taught so many people who are not software. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are?
Well, you used a phrase a moment ago that I want to drill down on, and that is repeatable. I think a lot of organizations look at, say, professional services as non-repeatable things. It's like, we'll just throw man hours at the problem, right? But services should be defined the same way we define software. It's what problem we're trying to solve. Instead of solving it with code, we solve it with person hours, but it should be defined up front or else you don't know how to price it. And I was working with a team and they said, oh yeah, that won't work for services, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, hang on, let's look at some of the implementations you've done. And it turns out all of their implementations were the same, except for, certain things they had to interface with or size of the community. But other than that, I mean, the services they offered could be repeated. And that's what we ended up implementing is here's a standard statement of work that can be sold by all the salespeople without them saying, oh, this doesn't look that hard to me. I think we could probably do that in 15 minutes. And you're like, yeah, nothing looks hard to people who don't know what they're talking about. But even like market validation, Jason was talking about, validating things in the market, and hardware is harder. Of course, now you have a 3D printer, but that didn't, let me go way back. Jeff Hawkins created the first Palm Pilot out of a piece of wood. And he ensured, he crafted it so that it would fit in his shirt pocket. And every time he would, and it had it drawn on Sharpie, little buttons and stuff. So to I guess summarize my rant, product management's the same.
Regardless of where you are.
Regardless of where you are. But the key, I think the key thing is, do you want your business to be repeatable, or are you in a customization business that is not repeatable? In which case you have to charge 120 or 140% of your cost if you're not going to repeat it.
Yeah. It's interesting. What you made me just think about is this idea that, Steve, you and I talk about this business and strategic role of product management. And at its core, the business and strategic role of product management should be the same everywhere. It's in software companies where product management has been pulled into Agile and pulled into delivery managers and backlog managers and doing design. So maybe, this is me throwing something provocative out there. Maybe non-software, product management, non-software companies is actually closer to what we think of as the traditional product management, this business and strategic role, than software companies where all these product management title roles have been created, which really are living in design and engineering type worlds, not in a product management role. That's not a question. It's sort of just something I'm thinking about.
I wrote about that in the new version of the strategic role of product management, that basically Agile broke product management by turning it into development. A lot of the product management work a lot of the work I see people with the title of product manager doing is in fact development work, not product management.
I see that too. Or it's business analysts with a product title.
I say a lot to people who are like trying to, every time I go in for a product ops conversation, they tell me about the agile role of product ops. And I stopped them and I said, agile is a development methodology, right? It is a way, it's a delivery methodology. But how you decide what you're going to do next, how you prioritize and strategize is not development. So what is your product methodology?
And they don't have one.
Undefined
No.
would be the
Yeah,
answer.
and it's like going back to the whole notion of like beyond software, and like what Jason said about the Wild Wild West. Like my first adult job was like at a pharmaceutical company, right? I was working for someone with the title of product manager, and I had no idea what she did, right? And I didn't understand what it was that the product manager did. We just like push products out the door. Like we were the technicians like putting together the kits that got sent out. We were the technicians that like made sure like the tubing was right or redesigned the tubing that makes like, that was really interesting. But like I wonder what the similarities are in those cases. But either way, like it's really about the outcomes, right? And I learned a lot from that experience, having had no exposure into software at the time, and then going into software and being very confused. Like, where are the outcomes?
I mean, that goes to the feature factory outputs versus outcomes type stuff. And if we can ground ourselves in the who and the what and the why, who are we solving the problem for? What's the problem? Why do they want to save it? Why do we want to solve it? We can start getting stuff. Your story made me think of, I was working in the aviation maintenance space, and a supplier of aviation parts for maintenance, their most profitable lines were kits. And what they were able to do is look at what are the things that are commonly bought together to do something, and they turned them into kits, which were already pre-done, and they actually had higher margins on because they'd already done this work to bring them together. And it's like products can be anything, any form factor. I want to give Adriana and Dutch a chance, let's talk about this. And this probably also works for even big industrial or finance companies who are doing product management internally, sort of the project to product type stuff. I'll leave project management aside. Every time I engage with places where there's product management and program management, I feel like we start getting to like crossing the streams of, in a Ghostbusters, right? It seems like if program management is looking across the life of multiple projects, is that just not product management? Now I'll start with Adriana and then we'll go to Dutch, because there are a ton of jobs in government and industry and places that, this is something that's going to be important for people. So I'll start with Adriana.
Yeah, so when working in a government, one of the things that very often happens when you are selected to get into a role is they'll be like, what are your qualifications in product management? Do you have a degree? And it's like, well, I don't think anybody has a degree in product management, but very often that is a requirement in many government jobs to have a degree in the field that you are in. And so what that also means is that before what I would call modern digital services teams that have sprouted up in cities and state and federal and also around the world. Before these teams started up, traditionally we had in government enterprise tech teams, right? So these would very often be like Department of Technology teams, very often led by CIO, which is great. But then I would sort of start looking at, well, who were their customers and how are their customers different from mine and the digital services team? And very often the digital services teams were set up to, well, build software, something software adjacent, or deliver a service that has software for the public that impacts the public for the public to consume. But many enterprise tech teams had the internal customer is my customer, right? I have to put up a bunch of servers. I have to like host the Office 365. I have to do all that stuff, set up some goals, security policies. So to me, I think that's a pretty clear line between the different types of organizations. Product managers and program managers is an interesting one. I do think that uh, you know, some product managers can be good program managers and vice versa. I think that there might be some people who think that there's some elitist aspect of one is better than the other. I don't really think that's true necessarily. Um,
I've seen
Sometimes
it
it
from
comes
both
down
sides, by
to,
the way.
yeah,
I've seen program
exactly.
management people
Yeah,
be elitist. I've seen product management people be elitist. So it's a two-way
exactly.
street there.
And it's a very weird thing because I think it's very similar. I think it comes down to the sort of organization you're in, the sort of legacies that your org has, right? So traditionally, a lot of like governments might call certain things programs, but have lately started to hire product managers. And a really good example that I'll sort of end this thought with is that when I was working in a team that built the paid sick leave program, it was an application for people in San Francisco, employers to fill out for COVID. We actually managed to be the first to launch it in the US even before the federal government had it because we had an agile team. We had developers who were ready to go right away. A lot of us were very used to shipping MVPs and stuff like that. Um, and so when we did that, it was very clear that the program was paid sick leave application, right? There was a program manager in charge of, I'm in charge of like the details of what does the legislation say a paid sick leave program should have, who qualifies, who should apply, when should it close, how much money should we give out, how should we communicate with people. But then my role in product was to then help them make decisions in a supporting role to be like, okay, in order to do this, this is our current state of technology. This is how we can deliver it. Without a digital services team, a program manager at a time might have said, well, it's going to be a PDF application, which would have been terrible in like early COVID times. But because we had a digital services team, we were able to say, okay, we can put up this really cool form in like, 10 different languages. It can be translated by humans and machines alike. And when someone clicks submit, it goes to their email and it texts them or something like that. All of these things were decisions that a product team could do because we understood the technology landscape, what we had and what we didn't have, and what constraints we had. Whereas the program manager, in our particular case, understood the legal constraints. And this is actually what I call LDD, legislation driven development, that many of the goals of our team were driven by what does the legislation say we have to do, but then we try to fit the software into that.
Yeah.
And so that was a very unique case. I've certainly not worked in an environment like that, but that's probably true in the Department of Defense and elsewhere. Anything like software adjacent, other constraints also being procurement is a big issue, but that's a whole other thing. You could have a whole event about.
And now that I'm listening to your answer, I start thinking about program management in government is probably different than program management in an IT
Yeah, in
organization
big
when we're
tech, yeah.
thinking PMI type program management,
Mm-hmm.
where it really is owned for that family medical leave. It was really owning a outcome from the government, not just the project management of getting it done. And so I think, just like in product management, I think program management sometimes is used for two different jobs depending on where you are. Thank you, Adriana. Dutch.
Yeah, to just piggyback on the program project slash product management, although there are a lot of overlap in some of the skills, again, program management is getting tasks done, whereas product is solving a problem. Getting the problem solved is kind of how I wrap my brain around it. I've got two non-technical examples. I'll keep them short. Recently, I went to a hotel, and a problem that hotels try to solve for their guests because they're out of their normal day-to-day routines is provide a workout center. Because people can't go to the gym, they may not want to take an Uber or walk to something, so they've provided a gym on site at the hotel. So I was traveling recently, did my workout, and then I went looking for the laundry room, which didn't exist. And so now they've provided me the ability to work out, and I'm gonna sweat. And now I have a problem that the hotel hasn't been able to solve for me, that I need to now not bring sweaty clothes on a plane home with me. I've got to solve that myself now. Some product manager didn't think through, as the voice of the customer, what problem are we solving, and does that solve their entire problem, or is it just getting a task done of, hey, they've got a workout facility. The other example, going with federal government, If you've ever seen or heard of the movie The Pentagon Wars with Kelsey Grammer and Carrie Ewells, it's a perfect example of product management that does not involve technology. It was a story of a decades-long program of building the Bradley transport vehicle that turned into the Bradley fighting vehicle, which was basically a tank. It was only supposed to carry people, but because every time a general would come in, they would need their new star. So they would say, well, we're going to put something else new on this transport vehicle, and it's going to turn into something else. You talk about scope creep. Oh, my goodness. Billions of dollars were wasted on this thing that was supposed to have been one thing that turned into something much more. And they could have had two different products, basically, if they had had a product manager that didn't allow the scope creep and said, let's finish this thing first, and then we can do this other thing that everybody wants. So not technical, but definitely product management that was not done properly. Great movie, Pentagon Wars.
Just this morning, I was on with somebody who works for a large government contractor, and literally this morning, and he was telling me the way they do things is they see that they can give a bid on something like a new ship or a boat or a truck or something like that, and they bid on it and then they build it. And because we were networking about product management jobs, he goes, but we don't really have product managers. We just do what they ask us to do. And I'm like, okay, well, you make a lot of money at it, so obviously there's a problem and there's money and all that sort of stuff. But it was very interesting to hear that some of these government jobs, just here's the spec, build it.
Yeah, because they don't have to worry about the customers, the users buying it. It's like, oh, we're going to provide this, and here you're going to use it. There's no sales, although then there's not really marketing in federal government if it's internal facing, if it's not facing the general public. So there's not really marketing, but there is communication. You still have to get the word out and maybe train people on how to use it, but it's not traditional. There's no sales, and there's not to the traditional marketing.
So actually, I want to dig in.
Sorry,
go ahead, Jason. Then no, please.
Okay, really quickly. At a company I used to work for, I was working with IT. I mean, I'm a software, hardware, services, product guy, but IT was trying to put some product management into their delivery of services internally to the business. And I started explaining to him, I said, here's the difference, that the fundamental difference between what you're doing internally and what we do is when we sell a product outside, because we were doing software, and I was hoping to get this across, is if you come out with an expense system that employees have to use and it sucks, it doesn't really matter because employees have to use it. You're not going to lose customers. They're just, if it goes down for 10 minutes in the middle of the day, well, they'll just wait and do it. If you put out a software product or a solution to your other customers that sucks and it goes down for 10 minutes in the day and it's way harder to use than something else, you may never know that you didn't even get that customer or you lost that customer. So the level of diligence you have to do between those two things are very different. So
yes, but I would also, maybe, and this is a place to start digging into what some of these disparities between. When I've worked with internal teams, HR or whatever, rolling out products, I'll put the air quotes on that, whether it's new, an expense reporting software or a new program for benefits or whatever it may be, it's a failure if you don't properly launch it, right? Just because it's not software product, we still need to, have some understanding of who we're solving this problem for, why, and, whether we can argue whether we're building a good solution or not, but we at least need to communicate and educate and launch it. And, even if it's an internal customer versus external customer, maybe different scales of what we do. But I would say that, just because it may be an internal product doesn't mean we don't need to do product marketing for that matter or something like that. I would say that it would be similar.
Well, that was the point I was trying to get across, is that you can just slap something together and people will have to use it and you can call it a success. But if you really want to move the needle on enabling your customers, which are the end users, I mean, a lot of times, unless somebody in senior leadership hated it, it was considered a success. So we were, like I said, they were trying to implement product management on the IT side, the services side, and we're struggling to do that because they just struggle to understand the fundamental goal of what good product management and solutions really were all about.
No, I get that. Question I'd like to ask, again, this is sort of beyond software. We've got so many people in the industry, in the software and tech industry, who've been laid off, who are looking for jobs in product. 60-some% of senior product managers are looking for a new job. I want this next question to be about, like, what do you see as the key difference? If somebody is looking to leave or looking for a job and maybe looking in the government or looking in services or manufacturing, what should they be thinking about as the difference? I'll start, Adriana, with you because you've been in the startups and now you've gone. What are the key things that somebody should be aware of in the difference between being at a software company versus being not in software?
It comes down to the difference between moving fast and breaking things versus moving not so fast, but definitely not breaking things. That's the huge philosophy that I think is the main philosophical difference. But on a very practical level, as a hiring manager for many product managers in government who've brought in many people from both public and private sector, including from the private into the public sector, I'm seeing a lot of like real hunger for people to be like, I don't want to work in a bullshit job anymore. Like, I want to know what I'm actually doing with my skills. And so, for the sort of folks who are like very drawn to, I want to see the real impact of the work that I'm doing as a PM. Um, Very often, what we call public interest technology can be government adjacent, could be in government software contracting. A lot of that feels very tangible, right? Because it's like I helped build a thing that gave out $10 million in like grants to businesses that really needed it during early COVID, or you worked on COVID vaccine search services that helped people like actually get back to work. Um, and so on a practical level, there's that not just advertising driven stuff, but also like people can benefit from the work that you're doing. And lastly, on like a personal, like worker individual level, there's a sense of, in the United States at least, and maybe elsewhere as well, very often government jobs are the last place that still have pensions, that still have unions. And there's a real hunger for that right now in the industry among people who feel like, I don't want to just live this precarious life and not have any of these protections anymore. And so very often they're like, you know what, I'm fine taking a 10-15% pay cut to go do this sort of stuff, especially if it's
Both
like
for the
highly.
feel good of what you're doing, but also for the less stress you have in the environment.
Exactly. Um, and so it's been interesting seeing a lot more people sort of make that switch. I was a founder myself in a previous life, never thought I would be a public servant. Many folks are like me, folks coming from big tech, folks coming from small tech, folks coming from all sorts of industries, sort of asking the question of, what can we do that has some impact? And so it doesn't have to be government again. It can be government adjacent. It can be nonprofit. There's a lot of like health tech, climate tech stuff as well that offers very similar benefits in terms of like the sort of job scope that you're offering. So I would encourage folks to sort of like look into that if they're curious. There's some like public interest tech virtual job fairs. The federal government very often does like hiring virtual job fairs as well. And people will be very happy to sort of help walk you through what you need to sort of think about making that switch.
No, I love that. And I was an executive at a not-for-profit standards organization, and it's similar there. And often many of these companies and governments and agencies are looking for somebody who can bring a business mindset, right? Who can bring some of the skill sets that we use in product management. It's so simple. It's like, what's the value you're creating? Why would a member want to join? Why do we want to do this type of stuff? And sometimes not-for-profits, if they're traditionally run by not-for-profit people, they may not have that. Even as a volunteer on the board of a youth orchestra, that when my son was in the youth orchestra, sometimes it was just getting down to the brass tacks of what problem are we solving for who and how do we do it. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities, both in a full-time job, but also in potentially volunteer and other opportunities where we can take our product management skills from software and apply them somewhere else. I love it, Adriana. Thank you. Jason.
So I was thinking about this, and I think the biggest challenge walking into a non-software part is the definition of product management may not be the same everywhere you go. The software side is, you
That's
know, you can
guaranteed.
argue whether or not it's what now?
Even within software, it's different.
Even within software, that's the scenario.
Well, yeah, but I mean, within software, I mean, Agile has definitely changed the game of what people think product management is and that sort of a thing. And you can argue good, bad, whatever. But I have seen everything from product manager as a lead demo person or product expediter or any of those sort of things, and I've seen people get stars in their eyes when they find out what it should be. The one pet peeve I have is, and I've heard this multiple times, is that you're CEO of your own business, which is absolutely not true. Even a well-run product management group where people do the right things, you don't have the final say. You don't have the ability to allocate resources, anything like that. And so you go in there, and I think that's the real struggle, is if you're a pure product management professional and you want to get into that, you really kind of, as you're interviewing, have to dig in and find out what their expectations truly are. What are the problems that you're going to be solving as you go in and talk to these people, and really understand that, so that you and the hiring company are on the same page as to what the expectations are. Otherwise, you're going to land, and maybe it'll be wonderful, maybe you'll be really disappointed, and you just have to make sure that you're aligned, your thinking and their thinking are aligned.
No, I get that totally. Same question to you, Dutch. What should, if somebody from software is looking at moving into non-traditional, non-software, what do you think they need to know, be aware of?
Again, I go back to the basics like usual. How do you identify the problem? What is the problem? And do we need to be the ones to solve it? And can we?
Yeah.
And that's really the strategy behind product management in the smallest of nutshells.
Regardless of industry.
Regardless of industry, product management is solving problems. To quote a great book, solving problems for personas.
Yeah. No, I love it. May, your thoughts?
I wonder if it's so we walk into a new job, and oftentimes there's things different. Like, even if you stay in the same industry, right? There's something different about this new organization, the new market, and the product that you have that exists today. Or if you're doing a 0 to 1, then it's just the organization and the market, right? So the way I look at it is the three things that impact the most about your job is your product, your market, and your organization. As a product manager, and when you go into any job, you need to be sort of at least somewhat the expert to be able to say something that people believe in, right? Like, you need that background, you need that context, and without that context, I don't think you could be successful. So, but it's like, if you go into a huge company, you need to understand how decisions are made, because you need to impact that, you need to influence that in order to do what's right for your organization. It's the same with government. How are decisions being made? What levers do you have to pull? How do you increase your social capital so you can influence those levers? Who do you need on your side to be really able to push the thing that you see as like the biggest gaping hole that we need to fill soon? And so understanding that organizational context, I think that's the biggest thing that changes. Market is something you're going to have to do regardless, and that's through talking to customers. Like, that organizational difference, that understanding what your product actually is. Like, if you build something for 1 million business owners to get money from the government, that's great. What is the product there? The product is not this tool. The product is a money delivery mechanism or access, right? It's not
Yeah.
not the tool. The tool is not the product.
And to build on that, when
Yeah.
I actually did build this money delivery mechanism, I saw it as the project was building the money delivery mechanism, and the program managers were determining who should receive the money. But then
Yeah.
ultimately, if you're in a pretty well set up sort of digital services team and government that we're sort of seeing now across the US and Canada and across the world, people who have this sort of like software development mindset as well as like the mindset of let's just build things that work. You soon get in a space where you're not like, once I have the social capital, can I build a product that will make this easier? Because you start to realize that very often consulting firms don't have all the answers, right? And that goes back to the waterfall model of maybe a program manager might have said, build me this thing. And it's a one-off thing. It's not really usable. You can't even change the label in a form. But then when you have a product team like we did, then you can go into a space of maybe I don't have to build 200 forms for 200 people. Maybe I can build a form product that can be integrated into CMS that is going to have what we need to make our form submission data HIPAA compliant. And we
Yeah.
have all those thought processes of product thinking that can come into, I can get the funding internally, I can get the support, and I can build this thing that can be used by internal customers that can then be pushed out to the public.
A couple of things that are just resonating with me right now. One is this idea of, I'll call it bureaucracy. I think one big thing is going to be different, whether it's going from a startup to an enterprise company. I was at GE for a while, or going from a startup to government or something like that. Is the decision-making processes, the red tape and stuff is probably going to frustrate some people. I remember leaving GE to go to an enterprise software startup, and it's like, wait, where's the process, right? It's like, but at GE, I thought there was too much process. So I think there's going to be that type of stuff there. But it also resonated in this conversation right now between Meg and Adriana is this idea of the whole product, right? And if we're looking at the whole product, the software tool we may be building is only a component of solving this broader problem that's going to have a lot of other things that aren't code in software as part of it, like getting money to people during a pandemic. Steve, before we move to my next question, thoughts for you on what should people thinking of moving from software to non-software companies be thinking about?
Well, I think one of the issues today certainly is everybody seems to, every hiring manager seems to want the impossible hire. I'm looking for somebody with 140 years of experience who's willing to work for minimum wage. And one of those aspects is certainly domain knowledge. And it's like, well, gosh, you've never worked for the government before. What do you know? And you're like, well, I'm a victim of the government. That's close enough, right? But all of that said, I was reminded of a product management task I had with my church. The pastor asked me to get involved, and I came in and I said, what's the product? And they said, well, we're doing the fundraiser for a new education wing, and we're going to have dinner provided by the hospitality committee, and we're going to have a show put on by our high school kids who are all super talented, and the junior high kids are going to provide babysitting. And I went, oh, that sounds like a tremendous offering. Who's the competition? And the whole room went silent. It's like, there is no competition. It's God, I mean, right? And I went, no. Who's the competition? And they're like, Baptists, I mean, they couldn't get anywhere close to it. And I said, the competition is an evening out. So you're competing with a movie theater. You're competing with, dinner and babysitting. And I said, I don't have little kids anymore. I don't know what babysitting costs, but let's do the math. And I called out, how much does the movie cost nowadays? Because I stream everything. We wrote it down. And, how much is dinner? I don't ever go out for a nice dinner. We go over, I won't say where, and so forth. So anyway, we put it together. And I said, so how much are you planning on charging for this event? And they said, yeah, $5 a person, because our cost is $0. And I said, okay, you're way off. Based on the math we just did, we need to be charging $150 a couple. And one of the people almost passed out. I mean, they were just like, oh, you're crazy. We'll never get that. And guess what? We sold it out in 24 hours. I mean, think about a babysitter that's reliable. I mean, that's worth its gold right there. And it's become an annual event at the church. But it started with the three things you guys keep talking about. It's like, what's the product? What are our organizational capabilities? And what are our differentiation with other offerings? And I think we often lose sight of that third one. But it's, basic product management, even in church.
No, it actually now is going to tell the question I have to go to. I didn't have this on my list. Was what is the most interesting place you think you've seen people do product management? I'm not saying they had a product management title, but like Dutch talked about the hospitality one with the gym. Where have you seen product management go? Oh wow, they may not know they're doing product management, but they did it really well. Jason.
So a question completely out of left field. Thank you, Grant.
You could repeat my church story if you wanted, Jason.
I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to go to the services story. This came out, the services the solution I was talking about in the past. I'm going to give a little bit of color on it just because it won't make sense otherwise. But the product was conveyor belts for beverage industry, which is a complete commodity. And one of the apps people that worked at the company came to us and said, is there a better way? And the reason is if a conveyor belt would break, because it's the least interesting thing in a beverage plant, people don't care about it. They care about a filling machine or a pasteurizer or whatever. They don't care about the conveyor belts. They're just supposed to work, but they break because they are under a lot of stress. And our services consumer services group would get pictures of conveyor belts with yardsticks on them saying, can you tell me what this is? I need to buy 200 feet of it or something like that. And so that was the genesis of how do we solve this problem for a customer? How do we make it so that and I think a lot of the product management, oh good, I'm kind of building up steam here finally, is people realize that there's a problem that needs to be solved. I'm going to pick on LinkedIn, even though we're on it right now. LinkedIn's a terrible CRM. I have a tip and trick that I use, and people are like, you need to start a business around this. But every time I meet a new person on LinkedIn, the first thing I do is send them a message that references where I met them. Because in 5 years, when I have forgotten everything about this and I need to network out into my network, I can go back to that very first message and see it. This is a problem that people need to solve. And I think that's really where the fundamentals of when people are not in product management but end up doing product management, that's the genesis of everything. Now, whether somebody will pay for that solution is a completely different question. But there is a problem that people need solved, and that's where we are.
And so anytime we see in the real world problems being solved, somebody's doing product management even if they don't know they're doing product management, right?
That's how I look at it. Yeah.
We were shopping. We moved earlier this year. We were looking at places to go, and we were looking at a couple complexes, and multiple complexes have built co-working locations inside the apartment buildings because a lot of people are working from home, but they still have a need. And for me, that was one of the places where you never think about it, but somebody did product management there. Adriana, what about you? Where have you seen product management, whether they had a title or not, that really surprised you?
Very recently, I met someone who worked on product on the most interesting database, I think, in the world, which is the Sustainable Seafood Watch application and database at Monterey Bay Aquarium, right? So 10, 15 years ago, someone had to build a product that was, is it going to be in SQL? Is it, what columns is this database going to have? How are we going to determine if it's like sustainable or not? And, it doesn't use at Whole Foods and lots of places around the world to determine if you should buy this tuna or not, which is fantastic. But I think a more like sort of traditional, untraditional product management space would be, the federal government has a great federal digital services team. And recently they rolled out the direct file system for many reasons, mostly because of monopolies. The United States does not have an easy to use tax filing system. And so they, by, like everything else here, it's not a bug, it's a feature for some people who make money from this, right? So a team has been building direct file, IRS direct file, doesn't work in every state yet, but has already processed many, many applications, and is a much needed service in this horrible timeline for lots of people. So I'm very thankful to people who do that sort of work.
I love that. I love that. Both stories, right? Both the sustainable database, but also the tax filing. Those are great places we never think about it, but really product. In probably both cases, they were doing product management, knowing product management, not just making decisions about problems to solve. Dutch.
Thankfully, I'm off mute now, and I'll admit my ADHD had me distracted. What's the question?
The question is, where have you seen product management that's most unique, that weird place that you could see product management, whether it's being done by somebody with a title or not?
Well, I don't know. Can you come back to me? I'll think about it.
I will do that. May. That's okay.
My friend's an arborist, people who cut down trees, and they went to a client's place once, and they're like, the client was freaking out about the bill. It's like $1,500 to chop down that tree, and he's like, "Yep. Do you want to pay $1,500 now, or when the tree falls over in 3 months and pay, tens of thousands for your house when it falls on your house, because that's what's going to happen?" And like the way he looked at it was like, well, arborist is a very dangerous occupation. Like the injury rate's really high. It's a very high degree of like care you have to take in order to cut down a tree safely, not just for yourself but for the surroundings around you, right? So like the difference between a $1,500 arborist and a guy you hire on Craigslist is whether or not you're going to be liable for that person's injury and also damage to your house when that branch falls the wrong way, right? But they'll look
Exactly.
at this tree and they'll say, okay, this is how we're going to have to take it apart. So the strategy to getting this tree out of the way is this, and that's how we're going to operate it. Like in a way, it's a bit of a like this. I am a subject matter expert. I'm the engineer who can solve this problem. But also in a way, it's like they might look at the tree as like, actually, this tree is not the problem, but that tree is. Like
Yeah.
the goal is to protect the house from the trees. And so it's really interesting to hear those stories and to tell people like what their value proposition is, and like listening to that like from real life is, I find, interesting.
From waterfall
Interesting.
to tree fall.
Yeah, waterfall is tree fall. I mean, but both May and Steve hit on this idea of understanding the value prop. What's the value of solving that problem, and maybe making sure we extract the right price premium because of that. Any thoughts, Dutch, before we...
Yeah. I'll go back to the hospitality industry. Hotels, the problem they initially try to solve is lodging. Like people need a place to sleep while they're traveling, or even, instead of being in the doghouse, so to speak. So Marriott was founded by people that are Mormons from the Latter-day Saint religion and such. And their beliefs are to not partake in alcohol and even caffeine in some places. So you've noticed that over the years, Marriott Hotels has started contracting with Starbucks and other coffee vendors. And their bars, they're still providing alcohol, but that's contracted out in a lot of places. So Marriott has now refocused on the problem that they're trying to solve, and then having other experts in their fields be able to provide the services that they, in their moral beliefs, don't want, that doesn't match with the strategy that they're trying to do. And so again, there's a problem to solve, but who is the right person or who is the right industry or organization to solve that problem? It doesn't have to be the primary.
I'll say, Dux, those types of places are where I see product management in the world all the time. Partnerships, Murray Cheese at Kroger's, right? Doing those type of partnerships. We're running up on time. We're going to do a quick. Our final question always is, what's your biggest takeaway from this call or learning? And we'll do a quick go around. Adriana, biggest learning or takeaway from the call?
There's lots of interesting product management activity around the world in different shapes and sizes and opportunities. So hopefully, if you're looking for an opportunity, you'll find something that's suitable that you can sort of like explore. And so if anyone's interested in public interest tech and PMing in that space, just feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you, Adriana. Jason.
I think that product management is fundamentally the same across, at least I'm phrase that the skills are fundamentally the same. A lot of people do it and they don't know they're doing it in various industries because everybody who's selling something needs some of these skills. And there's always room to learn. And so, same as Adriana,
Awesome.
reach out if you feel like it.
Yeah. Dutch.
I'll echo what Adriana and Jason both said, and then add on again, what's your problem? Can I and should I solve it?
I love the simplicity of that. Thank you. May.
We're short on time.
I'm reminded of my time in food tech, where we were building food tech, but the product itself was people getting food. And like, what is your product?
What is the core problem you're solving? I love it. Steve, my friend.
Product management is everywhere.
Product management is everywhere. First thing is, boy, sustainable marine life database would be an interesting thing to check out, and I probably would feel bad about probably some of the sourcing decisions I've made on seafood. But I'll go with something product management related. I think the key thing is, it's been echoed everywhere here. Product management is product management, right? If we're looking at this business and strategic role, it's about understanding the customer, understanding their needs and wants, determining what value they have, and solving it. And there's so many places people can take their product management skills that aren't just these startups and software. And as Adriana said earlier, maybe there's a better work-life balance and feeling of helping people more than yourself if you do it. So some great opportunities outside of that. I want to thank everybody for the great conversation. Little advertisement today. Talking Roadmaps released the episode of the podcast that I did with Justin. So if you want to hear my thoughts and Justin's thoughts on product roadmaps and strategy and how they work together, I go check that out. Product roadmaps, I've shared it. In 2 weeks, we're going to be back. Mei Wang is going to be leading a panel. Then I'm going to be on the road. But actually, in 4 weeks, we're going to have Phil Hornby and Justin from Talking Roadmaps on to talk roadmaps with us as well. So we look forward to seeing you guys then. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
So long.